Welcome to Benita's Maternity Program webinar. Today we're chatting with Sister Ingrid Groenewald, who will be chatting to us about breastfeeding and when to know if your baby is full or if still hungry. Welcome, Sister Ingrid.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be with you today again, and I just want to introduce you. This is my baby Erica, and I've also brought my boob along to, if we need it, I can actually show you as well. Okay. Right, so today I'm going to talk to you about breastfeeding, as well as how do you then know if your baby's hungry or if your baby's full. These are the questions, the kind of questions one often get asked, especially if it's your first baby. It's so new, you don't know what you're doing. And I think we also live in this modern time where we often measure everything. You know, everything that we do, we have measuring cups and so on, and we measure and we know exactly how much mils something is. And then if it comes to breastfeeding, we're often clueless in the sense like, how do you know? Because you can't measure. Okay, so there are some tricks and there are some tips that you will know, as to how you go along. And trust me, you do learn later on all the little things that you know exactly what's going on. So perhaps firstly, let's just take a step back and just see what happens in our bodies, with breastfeeding and with the volume of milk. So if one thinks before birth, so before you actually have your baby in your arms, your baby is getting all the nutrients and so on, everything that the baby needs. It's getting through the uterus, or basically through the placenta, given to baby. And this is an ongoing process. So this baby of yours is getting fed all the time. Okay, so just think about that. That is quite a big difference between before birth and after birth, because very often one hears people saying, my baby's feeding all the time and surely there must be something wrong, when in actual fact, remember, your baby comes from a world where he fed continuously. It's a very big change to suddenly actually have a feeling of hunger and have to wait for hunger. So the first thing, my first advice to you is this watch that you wear. Take it off, put it somewhere in a cupboard. Don't look at the time. Okay, you read your baby. Okay, so that's the first thing if we think about before birth. And then once you have your baby, there are a couple of things starting. Initially the boobs are soft, and if you think about the baby's stomach, the newborn baby's stomach is about the size of half a thumb. So just have a look at your finger, and just half of that is not a lot, So if you have to put in volumes of something, any kind of liquid, how much can you really put into that volume? And that is really where the design comes from, that you can't just feed your baby volumes and volumes of milk because the stomach is really small directly at birth. Okay, so basically the first milk that you are giving your baby, the first milk that your body is producing is called colostrum. And colostrum is very powerful stuff. It's really loaded with everything that is nutritious, and it's giving the baby energy, and it has lots and lots of antibodies because baby's suddenly born into a world of germs and bacteria and so on. So you're giving your baby all these wonderful things. And that is also, if we think about colostrum, the volume that baby's getting at this point is really little. We can't normally measure. So that is why you don't know, if you put your baby on the boob, how much your baby's getting. But with research and things that have been done, we know if your baby basically gets about 5 mils of that, it's about a teaspoonful, that is enough for a feed. But because you don't know the volume, you actually have to read your baby. And I'm going to come back to that. How do you read your baby? Let's just have a look at the volumes. Okay, so a newborn baby needs only about a teaspoonful of milk at a go. Okay, so that is quite normal because the stomach is very small at birth. So if we think about the first day, baby gets about, let's say, 5 to 7 mils per feed, and then also the stomach content is about 30 mils, that baby can actually take in that time period of 24 hours, that your body is actually making. I would actually say research has shown anything between 25 75 to 105 or 125 mils in 24 hours. And if you look at the numbers, it sounds little, but it is exactly right for your baby. Sometimes it's better not to overthink things, okay? So then on day 2, the baby's growing, is feeding, then the volume actually increases that your baby can actually take up to 20 to 30 mils at a go. The stomach slightly starts to become a little bit bigger. And by 10 days, so if your baby's 10 days old, the baby can drink about 60 to 80 mils at a go, okay? So, but again, we don't see this. You look at your baby, you feed your baby. But if you would see that, you know, this is about the mils that you get. And something that's quite interesting to know is that the volume of milk, if we think about how much milk do you actually produce in a 24-hour period, is that at 1 week, remember that at birth, it's very little, let's say 30 mils, 30, 50 mils, something like that. Then at 1 week, it's about 300 to 500 mils, okay? And then at 1 month, in a 24-hour period, it's 750 to just over a liter, 1,050 mils in 24 hours. And it remains like that from 1 month up to the point of when you're stopping to feed or when your baby's starting to introduce solids, where your baby is actually feeding a lot. That is about the volume of milk that your baby's getting. So it is important to know that with breastfeeding also, it keeps changing. The content of the milk keeps changing according to the needs of baby. That's why the volume stays the same, because it doesn't need more volume. The milk, what is in there, changes according to the needs of the baby. It's a very different need, a 1 month old compared to a 6 month old, if you think about it. Okay, so then let's have a look. So how do you then know your baby's hungry? So if you have a baby that's just born, a newborn, they're often also tired, perhaps, you know, it was a long labor perhaps, but then the best thing that you can do is having your baby on your chest, do skin to skin often, so you actually undress the baby up to the nappy. If you're really adventurous, I can say, well, take off the nappy as well, but that can cause all sorts of havoc as well. So you can keep the nappy on, and then skin to skin, you can put the duvet or something over you to just warm yourself or your baby if it's cold, but that skin to skin helps a lot, okay? So then normally you will see your baby has all sorts of little signs that your baby's going to be hungry. These little, normally if I ask, you know, how do you know your baby's hungry, whether we're looking at a newborn or a month old or a 6 month old, how do you know your baby's hungry? The first answer that I, in most of the time that I actually get is, oh, my baby's crying. And yes, that is a sign of hunger, but that is a late sign of hunger, because by that time your baby's frustrated, irritated. If you think about yourself when you're hungry, how do you feel? If you don't get anything to eat, you become really frustrated and irritated. And this is how your baby feels later on if it starts to cry. And normally, especially if it's your first baby or if your baby is very young, it's very tricky to basically remain calm and try to latch your baby and position your baby for a good feed if your baby is already in hysterics. So it's a lot easier to do all that if your baby is calm. So it helps to have a calm baby, and by doing that is by looking at the first signs. How do you know your baby is hungry? My advice actually in the first week or two is, if the eyes open, you can assume your baby's hungry. If your baby's sleeping and is waking up, you can assume your baby's hungry, because remember again, your baby comes from a world where he fed continuously, okay? So now what happens? So if he wakes up and you are not feeding him, he is gonna be calm, but he's going to start looking around, and then he's going to start moving his head. If there's something touching the cheek of the baby, the little mouth goes like a little bird trying to reach whatever is touching. Sometimes it's a blanket and the baby really tries to get hold of this blanket here. So that is a reflex that the baby actually also has to basically try to latch. Okay, so that is already also a sign of hunger. So then you can feed your baby. But now if you don't feed your baby, the little hands are going to come here, and he's really going to start sucking his hands and then getting very irritated, becoming, you know, you can see the facial expressing, getting cross, and then the crying starts, and later on the screaming starts and the hysteric starts. So that's normally the pattern of how do you know your baby's hungry. And really, it is a lot easier if you see your baby's waking up and you know, okay, this baby is hungry now, is to take your baby then and feed your baby. Don't wait until you have this hysterical baby, especially if it's, you know, if this is a new thing for you to actually breastfeed and all of this, because it becomes very tricky and it's very stressful. And the more you stress, the more baby stress, like it's a vicious circle. So it's a lot easier if everybody's calm to actually take your baby and feed your baby. Okay, so this is how you would know your baby's hungry. So then how do you know then your baby's full? Because we can't measure, you can't measure the amount of milk that your baby's getting. First of all, how do you know your baby's getting enough? Is you looking at the output of the baby. What are the nappies telling you? You know, so if you, how many times in 24 hours are you actually changing the nappy of a newborn baby? So not just a newborn, for any age baby. The newborns initially, they don't wee and poo a lot, but as the days go on, the first day often is like 1 dirty nappy, the second day 2, the third day 3, and then from the 4th day, when the actual volume of milk increases, where initially, remember I said you've got colostrum in the first bit, which is really concentrated, but round about day 3, day 4, the volume of milk becomes a lot. It becomes a lot more. So you actually feel, you know, that the boobs are a lot fuller. So then at that point, you know your baby wants to feed, you know, or needs to feed more frequent, because it also helps you to, you know, to just drain your, you know, the boobs and so on, also for engorgement, not to really have that. Okay, so then if we think about the output at that time, day 4, day 5, if the volume of milk that the baby's getting suddenly increasing, you will start noticing that there are also more dirty and wet nappies. Okay, so we're looking roughly about 4, 5, 6, and even more than that, dirty nappies, and about 5 or 6 wet nappies. Okay, so this is then that you know, okay, my baby's getting enough because I'm changing nappies all the time. Okay, so that is how you know you're getting enough milk, that the baby's getting enough milk in. But at the actual feed, how do you know your baby is actually getting enough, or is full? How do you know your baby's full? I know in the past it was always this belief that the people actually were told you have to look at the time to basically start measuring the time, so that when the baby starts feeding for the first day, you would only feed 5 minutes, then 6 minutes, 7 minutes. But that is luckily old-fashioned. Okay, so if you still do this, if anybody tells you to look at the time for how long you must feed your baby, just let it go in here and out there, because that is definitely not the correct information given to you. So what we normally recommend, you put your baby on the one side. Okay, baby is now calm, you let your baby starts feeding. Then no matter what the length of time is, you know, you don't look at the time. And I know initially it feels like you're feeding forever and you're feeding for a very long time, but that is how it must be initially. Okay, so firstly, you're going to see your baby's now hungry. So the baby's awake, the eyes are open, and you see your baby suckling, and then taking a rest, and suckling, and taking a rest. It's like if you think about, if you're very thirsty and you've got a glass of water, you drink initially a lot quickly, and then you put it down, and then you slow down. And this is what babies also do. They slow down with their feed. They are not finished because they're slowing down. So your baby's going to feed, stop a little bit, feed, stop a little bit. And the stopping a little bit actually starts to increase. And at some point, the eyes will close. And it really is going to look like, okay, your baby might be sleeping now. Perhaps is your baby finished? And just when you think you're taking your baby off, and then suddenly the baby is starting to suckle again, your baby's not done. Okay, so you can just sit back and just relax. Try to do something else, or try and look at your baby, or, you know, this is a time that one can actually read a lot, or you can, you know, catch up on your series that you're watching or whatever. Don't think about how long you're doing this. Okay. Then once your baby's latch is broken, so if your baby's really asleep at this point, your baby, you know, the mouth is open and baby's not actually attached on the boob anymore, then you take your baby off, you put your baby over your shoulder, or however you wind your baby, Then this whole process is slightly going to wake the baby again, and then you put the baby on the other side. So that first side can sometimes be 10 minutes. It can sometimes be 40 minutes. Don't look at the time, okay? Then you put your baby on the second boob, and then obviously this side, the baby will initially start feeding, and then much quicker is going to stop because he is already full and he is now very sleepy. So once he's sleeping and he's let go again and there's no latch, then you can wind him again, and then you can put him down for a sleep. Now with the next feed, you would obviously remember that if you did this, the one side he fed for a long time, and the second side, or this, you know, the other side, he fed for a lot shorter. So automatically, you know, you will actually feel what side to feed first, because it's going to be the side where he didn't drink a long time. So the second side is going to be a lot fuller. It's going to feel a lot fuller compared to the first side. So you can basically then start him next time on that side, and then you switch over to this side. This way you're making sure that they have stimulation on both sides, you know, throughout as he's growing older, because remember that the first couple of weeks you're really laying down the foundations of milk volume, of your body getting used to breastfeeding. So you want to encourage frequent feeds. You want to encourage both sides. Later on, as your baby grows older, it's quite common that baby feeds only on one side and then with the next feed on the other. But I would say in the first couple of weeks, it's best to try to stimulate both sides, just for that stimulation, so that you have, you know, that you're building that or that foundation of breastfeeding at that point. So how do you know your baby's full? Your baby is going to feed for some time, and then later on falling asleep, or he's just taking himself off, you know, there's no latch anymore, and then you can boob your baby. You might find after 10 minutes, sometimes after 30 minutes or an hour or 3 hours, you know, suddenly your baby's awake again and wants to feed, and that is perfectly fine. You can feed your baby again. Again, remember, don't look at the time. There are days, there will be some days and some times in the day that babies want to cluster feed. They want to feed all the time it's almost like a buffet food, you know, like eating somewhere, and you have all these starters and main, and you have a dessert. So think about that your baby's doing this, and then suddenly you have a little bit of a longer gap, and then your baby feeds again. So you can never really say what you expect how your baby's going to do. You look at your baby. If the eyes open and he's starting to really root a bit with a little mouth, and you can see, okay, you know, you put something here and he does this, you know, your baby's hungry. And then you just feed your baby. Don't worry about time. There is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with the milk or what is in the milk. It cannot happen, okay? It keeps changing to the needs of your baby. As your baby grows, what is in the milk keeps changing according to the baby's needs. And that is really something that cannot be made. It's only breast milk, okay? If we think about that, the volume of milk stays the same from about 1 month throughout, you know, because what is in the milk keeps changing then according to what the baby's needs are. Okay, and that really is a very big difference. It's one of the big differences compared to anything else, because it's also living cells and everything that your baby's getting. So I hope I answered some of your questions. If you think, how do you know your baby's hungry? You know, eyes open, little mouth rooting. How do you know your baby's full? The latch is broken. Okay, don't look at the time and decide you have fed long enough. Now I'm going to take you off. Okay, because your baby is telling you, your baby, this is a kind of a language that your baby has. Your baby's communicating with you by sign languages and body languages. And it's very interesting how quickly you do learn your baby's language, and you do understand what your baby is going to tell you. And you learn on the job, you know, so it's something that you will keep learning as the days go, and you will become really the expert of your baby. Remember, I'm just going to go on also with the amount of nappies. This is, like I said earlier, this is how you know your baby is getting enough milk. And round about 6 weeks, the 6-week mark, is where suddenly a lot of changes take place again, where one becomes so used to these dirty nappies that are so frequent, sometimes 8, 10 dirty nappies that you're changing in a day, which is quite normal, and also that it's quite liquidy, sometimes so liquidy that it's water, that you think, does my baby have diarrhea? And it's not. It's just how it is with a breastfed baby, okay? And then come 6 weeks, or in that area, then suddenly you might actually find that the dirty nappies become a lot less. So much so that you might start skipping days where nothing happens. Baby's weeing, but there are no dirty nappies. And the first day passes, the second day passes, the third day. By the third day, you're convinced your baby's constipated because, you know, where are the nappies? You're so used to these dirty nappies so frequently. And it's at 6 weeks, there's a lot of change taking place. The baby actually absorbs so much of the milk that there's very little waste product. So the baby really is doing this very functional now. And also the bacteria change in the gut. So all these things combined basically can result in change, you know, that you don't have a lot of nappies, that they decrease by quite a bit. So we normally say either 8 dirty nappies in one day or 1 dirty nappy in 8 days is perfectly normal. Okay, and even though I'm telling you this, and if you're still pregnant and you're listening to this, you know, I tell you this now, but believe me, by day 3, day 4, you're convinced your baby's constipated. But then once you see your baby's stomach goes again, and then you see, oh, but it's still watery, it's not constipation. This is the normal pattern of a breastfed baby. Some babies don't skip days, but it's definitely a lot less. It's not 8 anymore, but let's say 2. So it does come down. So the amount of nappies that you're going to use will decrease, which is great news for parents, especially if you think about buying nappies and so on. So you're not always going to use the amount of nappies compared to what's the amount that you're using in the first 6 weeks.